This is something that I think generally people don't think about, stuff like this. It seems that more and more societies in the world today, people are more depressed, more anxious than ever before. Is that a symptom of something unusual going on in our society? Is it just people that are more comfortable talking about it now?
I think at least part of it is the complexity of our society. It isn't certain how the future is going to lay itself out, and it isn't certain that what you knew in the past is going to be sufficient for you to move forward into the future. So there's lots of opportunity, but it's very complex. And it's not easy to keep up in our world. You know, like if you look around the world, you might think, well, the happiest people are those standard of living is the highest. That's actually not the case. And you think, okay, but why wouldn't that be the case? It's like, what do you want? Malaria and death at 40? Obviously not. But then you think, okay, what's the price you pay for a high standard of living? Well, that's easy. You virtually always sacrifice the present for the future. You're always working. It could crash at a moment's notice. You better keep your eye on it. And every day you're thinking, okay, this has to be done, and this has to be done, and this has to be done. And it pays off, but it's not like you're not running on a treadmill to keep that going. And so that's security, and it's health, but it isn't necessarily happiness, and it's certainly not necessarily freedom from anxiety. Sure. And I would say most people in the modern world, weirdly enough, have far too much to do. You know, 2 career families and a couple of kids. It's like, man, you're done. That's 60 hours a week of flat out work. Yeah. So, and that can be too much. And then I also think, because our society is philosophically unstable, and that's sort of reflected in this polarization, is that people are doubtful about whether their lives have any meaning, for example. You know, why bother? What's the use of it? Who cares? It's like, what difference is it going to make in a million years, you know? And life is hard, and if you just have a nihilistic viewpoint, then it's easy to be swamped by doubts and existential angst and all of that. And like, I think that's a mistake, because I think that your life can be very meaningful. It's proportionate to the responsibility that you take on. And you can learn that by watching when you're engaged in the world, you know, and what works to sort of protect you from feelings of isolation and doom. So I think part of it is the complexity of the modern world. Yeah. I also can't shake the sneaking suspicion that it has something to do with our diet. But certainly one of the reasons is that people eat far too many carbohydrates. Yeah, I mean, there's more and more evidence that dietary sensitivity, for example, is linked to conditions like schizophrenia. For a long time, we've cast doubt on the reality of meaning. That's part of the death of God. There's no real meaning in life. It's like, no. It does not look like that's true. It looks like it might be the case that there's nothing more real in life than the sense of meaning. I actually think you can I do make that case in 12 Rules for Life. I think you can make a completely coherent case that meaning is an unerring guide. There's limits. If you're going to allow your sense of meaning to guide you, you don't want to lie to yourself, because you pathologize the instinct. You know, because if you keep filling your head up with nonsense, the meaning generator is going to become corrupted, and it's going to make things shine for you that shouldn't shine. They'd only shine for someone who's corrupt. So if you're going to be guided by your sense of meaning, then don't fill your spirit with garbage. That sort of applies to the first few rules. Don't lie. Don't do things that you hate. Don't make the thing that guides you ill. There's a real fundamental idea that's really deeply rooted in Western civilization, which is that the most daring possible approach to life, and I would say the most meaningful approach, is to tell the truth and let whatever happens happen. It's an adventure. It's like, so I could come in here and say, well, I'm going to craft this conversation so it's about my book. And it's kind of predictable. I know what's going to happen. But it's way more engaging to say, no, let's just have the best conversation we can have, and then wait and see what happens. Well, that's way more, that's super interesting. That's way more interesting. So we talked about the idea of the self, right? So the self is everything you are and everything you could be across time. Okay, but here you are, caught in this little fragment of time. But there's this you that has the potential across time. Well, it's something that you're trying to grow towards to maximize your potential, right? So then you might ask, well, how does that potential manifest itself in the present so that it can be revealed? Well, the answer is through the instinctive meaning. So that was Jung's answer. I thought, wow, that's just mind-boggling, that idea. It's like, okay, you could be more than you are, obviously. That's obviously the case. How does that manifest itself in the moment? Well, that which you could be tells you where to walk by making that path meaningful. There are times in your life when you're not going to be happy, and then what are you going to do? Your goal is demolished. And there are going to be plenty of times in your life when you're not happy. There might be years. And so it's a shallow boat in a very rough ocean. And it's based upon a misconceptualization. Happiness is something that descends upon you. Everyone knows that. It comes upon you suddenly. And then you should be grateful for it, because there's plenty of suffering. And if you happen to be happy, well, wonderful. Enjoy it. Be grateful for it. And maybe try to meditate on the reasons that it manifested itself. What you should be pursuing instead is, well, there's two things. You should be pursuing who you could be. That'd be the first thing. It's like, because you're not who you could be, and you know it. It's like your life is short, and it's troublesome. And perhaps you need to do something worthwhile with it. And if so, then you should do the most worthwhile thing. And you should figure out what that is for you. And part of that's definitely going to be to develop your character as much as possible, to dispense with those parts of you that are unworthy. And then maybe, if you're fortunate and you do that carefully, then happiness will descend upon you from time to time. And that's the best you've got. And then also perhaps during sorrowful times, or worse, evil times, the fact that you've strengthened your character and that you're aiming at the highest that you can conceptualize,